We talk about having a theology of God, the Bible, and salvation, but what about a theology of religions? And what does the Southgate Fellowship statement have to do with it? Dr. Dan Strange joins us today on the show. But first, a word from ABWE President Paul Davis.
ABWE missionaries are coming beside the lost and the hurting around the world. And through the Global Gospel Fund, they're pulling people from the darkness and training them as leaders. They're planting churches, and they're even beginning their own missions movements. You may already support one ABWE missionary. Would you consider a gift to the Global Gospel Fund to support all 1,000 of our missionaries? Thank you for that.
Become a partner today at abwe.org/Global Gospel Fund. Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Advancement and Communications with ABWE. Joined again, as always, by Scott Dunford, West Coast Advancement Coordinator and Lead Church Planter for Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. It's a mouthful. Scott, I'm glad that we're here in the year 2021. Whatever this year brings us, the Lord is on the throne. God reigns over the nations, and we're grateful. I'm grateful that we can sit here and do this again. Got a lot to dive into today, but I'm going to throw something out there, Scott. So, Guys, you're watching this happen in real time. Scott doesn't know this, but I'm going to tease this towards the end of this episode. I've got some news that I can share. I'm not sure even Scott is aware of what I'm going to share. So if you stick it out through the whole episode, you'll hear Alex's announcement at the end. Scott, any guesses?
I don't know. I mean, you get an honorary doctorate from Liberty?
Yeah.
I can't wait to find out.
I have no comment on that one. Anything that I say would probably get me in trouble, really on both sides of that. So I'm just not going to say anything. Honorary doctorates are the best doctorates, though. Before we get too far gone, before we lose everyone, we've got a guest today, Scott, who is no lightweight, and he's certainly no honorary doctorate, right?
No, we have Dr. Strange from London, and actually it's Dr. Daniel Strange, who is the college director at Oak Hill Theological College in London. He lectures on culture, religion, and public theology. He's married to his wife, Ellie. They have 7 children. He's also an elder at East Finchley Baptist Church. And his PhD from Bristol University has been published as The Possibility of Salvation Among the Unevangelized. So you can kind of see where this is going. Also have several books published. One of the most significant books as far as our discussion goes is called For Their Rock Is Not Our Rock, an evangelical theology of religions. Also a book called Confident, Why We Can Trust the Bible, which he co-authored with Mike Ovey, and a new book that just came out with Good Book Company called Plugged In, Connecting Your Faith to What You Watch, Read, and Play. So Daniel, it's so good to have you with us. Sorry for the Dr. Strange joke, but I'm sure you've heard those many, many times. Welcome to our show.
Great to meet you, Scott. Great to meet you, Alex. Just to say on that my dad, what's interesting about that name is my dad, who's originally from Guyana in South America, he came over to the UK in the 60s. But his name wasn't Strange. He chose the name Strange. His name was Prashad. He came from a Hindu background. So there's a real mystery. He died about 10 years ago, but we don't know why he chose the name Strange. So that's even more strange.
So he may be a wizard. That's what you're getting at.
Maybe he's a comic book lover.
Yeah, yes. I think it might have been the Peter Sellers film Doctor Strange was around at the time, but we don't know. He went to his grave not really telling us about it. So there you go.
Well, and he left that birthright to you, and you get to bear the consequences living in London, ministering there, and but hopefully pointing people to the right, the right faith. So that's quite a change. So I want to transition this from comic books to mission. So you've written a lot. You're obviously working in academia. What piqued your interest and caused you to devote your academic career to writing and thinking and challenging people about this area of missions?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think that the background, my grandparents on my dad's side were Hindus, and I think. I've always been inquisitive. So when I got converted when I was 16, I wanted to go and study theology and religious studies. And I went to a very liberal, secular kind of religious studies department where I was immediately kind of labeled as the Baptist fundamentalist. But I think it was a kind of a refiner's fire. But one of the person who would become my PhD supervisor, a guy called Gavin DaCosta, who's probably the world Catholic authority on Catholic positions to do with other religions. We got on really well. He was very confessional in his own Catholic faith. So we started talking and he wanted me to do a PhD. And I was really interested in that question of soteriology and salvation and what happens to people who have never heard. And at the time, there was a thinker who died a few years ago, a guy called Clark Pinnock, who was associated with the Openness of God movement. But he was writing a lot on the idea of inclusivism, that people could be saved by Jesus even though they didn't know about him. And I was quite critical of that. So I spent 3 years studying Pinnock, and so my PhD dissertation was on what happens to people who never hear, coming from a kind of more reformed evangelical perspective. And then I think what happened then is that I realized that the question of salvation is so key, but I had other questions like what do we make of the phenomena of religion? What do we say about truth? We say that other religions can't lead to salvation, but what can we say? Is there any truth in them? Why has God ordained other religions? How do they serve? And that got me into writing a much bigger work, the Rock book, which is trying to give a very detailed description from a biblical point of view, talking about the religious other. What is it in biblical terms, especially given the fact that the Bible doesn't really use the term religion at all. So I've always been interested in those areas, and from a missiological point of view, really. So that continues to pique my interest and my research interests, especially as a theologian. I think that's the interesting thing. I'm very interested in kind of the theory of what does it mean for a theologian to study mission? What does it mean for missiologists to be theological? What does that mean for the study of religion in general? And I'm spending more time thinking about those more, I suppose, methodological questions, which I think are so crucial as we work out the importance of theology for understanding other religions.
So, I want to just ask one more question about the book, because I think it's practical, especially, we were talking, before we started recording. I'm out here in the Bay Area, very similar, I think, in many ways to London. I've only been to London one time, but it strikes me as similar in that, majority population Asian, an aging Caucasian population, really diverse in the in different religions. And just this week, we got a knock on our door, and a Muslim family was at my door, and they were very concerned because someone in their family had been made a profession of faith, and they had been attending our services and being in contact with our people. And
they knocked on your door.
And they were just, they were very sweet, very heartbroken, and they weren't accusatory at all. They were pleading, with me not to do anything as much as just to sympathize with their situation. Although I think that they did have something they did want me to do. But the things that kept coming out of their mouths were, all religions are good and they're fine, but you need to stay in your lane and we'll stay in our lane, and our people can let our people stay where they're at, and you guys stay where you're at. But they're all good and they're all wonderful, and Jesus is our hero. This kind of discussion, right? We kind of expect that in the secular, very pluralistic West, but we also see some of that kind of creeping up into the churches. So have you seen this and this will also segue, I think, into the next part of our discussion, but why do churches need to have a theology of religion? We kind of always have assumed, especially with the older generation, that it's obvious, right? Like, Christianity is the way, the truth, and the life, and Hinduism and Islam and these other things are all wrong. So do you see that changing? Do we need this evangelical theology?
Definitely, because I think it's interesting. Some of the stuff I'm thinking through at the moment is how the word religion has changed in its meaning from pre-Reformation, post-Enlightenment. And I think what what goes as being the kind of this neutral scientific study of religion is actually liberal ecumenical theology in disguise, which then we've bought into, and that leads to the kind of more pluralistic view, or saying that there's religion and there's a religious sphere and the secular sphere, which wouldn't have been understood pre-Reformation. No one would have understood what you were talking about. If you talked about religion, you meant the Christian religion, you meant the Christian Protestant religion. And so there's a whole load of very confusing language that people use about religion in general. I think there is a very strong pluralistic background because no one wants to be confrontational. Everyone wants to be more dialogical. But we come back to the same question. Who are human beings? What is their relationship with God? How should they be worshipping God? And what happens when they don't? And the question of salvation is key to that, but also the question of truth. Just what are other religions? And I think there's a strong continuity that goes, I would argue, from the New Testament out throughout history, including the kind of the missionary movement, which has always tried to say, well, the Bible is the way that we view the world, and so we need to understand the religious other in whatever manifestation it comes in. What does Scripture say about that? And I suppose one of the more scandalous things that I suppose I'm trying to say is that actually the Bible does have a united, detailed and coherent theology. It's not different theologies. It's one theology on how we view the religious other. And so it's as much our commitment to Scripture to say we're going to view the world through Scripture rather than the other way round. But of course, the pressure not to do that is immense from outside.
So this maybe gets back to not only what you've done with the book, but what you've done with the Southgate Fellowship. And you can tell us more about that in a moment. But what do you see overall that's wrong in missiology that you're seeking to correct? Because I think a lot of people engaged in missions would say, I know that these other religions can't save. That's why I'm engaged in missions. But it does go deeper than that. What do you see that's wrong that you want to correct?
Yeah, so I think part of it is a methodological thing. I think increasingly, as a theologian, and you could say I would say that because I am a theologian, I have been frustrated looking on almost into missiology or having a missiological interest, but being a theologian, that missiology seems to be more and more governed by social sciences, and that those social sciences either are purportedly neutral, which they can't be, or they're kind of they have theological tendencies that I wouldn't say are particularly evangelical. So I think some of it is a method question about how I mean, I'm all for deep social science, ethnography, anthropology. All these things are absolutely critical to mission, but they have to be understood as theological disciplines under the Word of God. And that's one of my frustrations, that how do we get back to that position where we recognize that everything we do must be biblical? And I don't mean that in a kind of a fundamentalist way. I mean that in a biblical theory. How do we understand the nature of reality through the biblical revelation? And then I do think questions of salvation and truth, and just trying to really say, well, what does the biblical revelation say about the religious other, and how do we have the biblical lenses to see that? So they're some of the frustrations, and I think that question of what happens to people who never hear, the unevangelized. I mean, those soteriological questions have always been really important throughout the history of Christendom, and I think we need to continue to think about those questions as well, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of critique of my kind of position or our kind of position to say, well, it's all about post-colonial, we were colonial or imperialistic. But actually, the more you look into it, the more actually many 18th century and 19th century missionaries, they weren't interested in imperialism or in colonization. They recognized that people needed to hear about Jesus to be saved. And yes, there of course there are civilized cultural implications for our faith. I mean, I teach public theology, but at the end of the day, really, it wasn't a colonization project. It was about proclaiming the truth of Christ to a world that is lost. And I think we need to always remember that as well.
The other thing is, I don't think that most people who are practitioners in the world of missions, or those who are very much narrowly focused on the discipline of missiology, I don't think they would agree in theory with anything that you're saying, that, oh yeah, this is a theological endeavor. But practically, I personally suspect there's such fear that we would be sort of brains on a shelf, right? That we would be the frozen chosen, that we would be only theological thought with no shoe leather to our faith. I think there's such a fear of that, that when it actually push comes to shove, we're not approaching missions as a theological endeavor. Let's take a quick break. And what I want to do is come back and introduce the Southgate Fellowship that you're a part of, what you're seeking to accomplish with them. So we'll be right back in a moment with Dr. Daniel Strange, the other Dr. Strange, talking about the Southgate Fellowship, exclusivity of Christ. We'll be right back.
Have you ever been approached by a student expressing a missionary call? For the last 15 years, Spurgeon College's Fusion program has been equipping students for missions through life-on-life discipleship, college coursework, and intensely practical training. If you know a student desiring to become a missionary, send them to Fusion at Spurgeon College as their next step. To learn more about how we are equipping students for a lifetime, visit spurgeoncollege.com/fusion.
Hi, I'm Scott Dunford, and I'd like to share with you about a new nonprofit ministry established to help churches, Christian schools, and other ministries protect children and prevent abuse. Rich Hamar from Church Law and Tax states that the number one reason that drives churches to court is child sexual abuse. I can't think of anything more devastating to these lives, their families, and our witness before a watching world than sexual abuse that takes place in ministry. The traumatic impact often leaves the vulnerable not wanting anything to do with God or His people. Our efforts toward evangelism, discipleship, and spiritual formation are not only neutralized, but shattered. Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention was formed to help ministry leaders understand the complexities of child protection and abuse prevention. They are establishing standards and an accreditation program that will help verify that appropriate measures are in place at your church or ministry. Learn more about them. Find a helpful and free assessment tool to help you see how you measure up in this area. Go to abuseprevention.org and click on the link for this resource assessment. Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention.
And this June, attend the national conference. Go to abuseprevention.org and register with ABWE21 as the promo code to receive 20% off your ticket. That's promo code ABWE21 to receive 20% off. Brooks Buser, president of Radius International.
I am here with Mark Dever, senior pastor at Capitol Hill Baptist and president of 9 Marks.
When you go to a culture that's a different language than yours, you're ending up in a kind of majority language that's been reached. And there are other peoples still more hidden, and it's those people who are often almost entirely unreached, and they take more cross-cultural effort. Is there a way we can better train people to have more realistic expectations of what life is like in the kind of 2 steps away from my culture, and be able to sustain family life with its normal difficulties there, so that there can be a long years and even decades-long witness in that culture? And it seems like Radius is set up to provide that training. Radius is about reaching unreached people groups.
Go to radiusinternational.org, radiusinternational.org.
We're back with Dr. Daniel Strange, author of Their Rock is Not Like Our Rock, a Theology of Religions. And also the next thing we do want to mention is the fact that you're one of the co-chairs of something called the Southgate Fellowship, which it kind of sounds like the name of a church. You're not a church, but the name doesn't say it all. What is the Southgate Fellowship? Why did it come into being? To unpack that for us.
Yeah, so Southgate is just the place where we first met, which is the area of London that where I teach Oak Hill colleges. So that's it. I live in Southgate, so that's the reason for Southgate. We had to call it something. So there you go. I think, in a...
The London Confession was taken.
Yeah, exactly. 1689 was done already. So in 2016, I think some of the things that we were talking about before the break, I'd been thinking about, and just talking to a friend of mine who's one of the contributors to the Southgate Fellowship, a guy called Flavien Pardigan, a French missionary. We thought it would be great just to get a number of like-minded theologians, missiologists, and reflective practitioners together. And so we just, in some ways, we just thought about having a colloquium, inviting some people together. And that formed really the Southgate Fellowship. So we were all kind of like-minded, wanting to say, what does mission look like in the 21st century, when we still think that the solas of the Reformation are really important? What does it mean for mission to say sola scriptura, solus Christus, only by faith, sola fide, only by grace to God's glory alone? What would mission look like? And I think some of it was born out of frustration at seeing how a lot of missiology was done, but it was wanting to be constructive. We never thought that we'd end up with a 40-page kind of affirmations and denials, but at the end of that first meeting, we had a great time. We wanted to meet again. And so we thought, look, one thing that has worked in the past is writing a number of affirmations and denials. Just it's not meant to be a kind of a creed or a confession. It's just a statement of like-minded theologians saying, this is how we see things. We'd love a discussion. And so I've been the co-chair. The other co-chair is David Garner, who's the one of the vice presidents at Westminster Theological Seminary.
Not far from us. Right.
And we've got a number of others. So it's European people who are Presbyterians. I'm a Baptist, others as well. So it's trying to say, this is what we think about mission. And it's taken so long because writing these affirmations and denials takes a long time. I don't know whether you've ever tried to do it.
No.
each affirmation and denial has a number of clauses. And then we got some funding for a website. And then we thought, well, just like some of the other statements that have appeared in the last few years, it would be great if people wanted to kind of sign it to say that they agree with it. And so we've had a number of people signing it as being they agree with this statement. In some ways, I mean, I know it is quite not unfashionable, but sometimes I think the thing about affirmations and denials is that you have to be very clear and concise and specific. It doesn't allow for wriggle room, but that's the point. I think what we want to do is try and get a discussion. It's not meant to be the end of a discussion on mission. It's meant to be the beginning, but being very clear on specific issues that we have been troubled about, that we'd like to talk about more, to do with all aspects of mission from a theological basis, so from methodology through to eschatology. And so Themelios, the Journal of the Gospel Coalition, they published it, and now it has its own life and its own website, and we're hoping to do more with it.
Well, practically, when you're in a setting, and I say this from experience, in which there's very little gospel witness and very few gospel workers, and you're surrounded by darkness, you do tend to want to, and I think this is actually a good impulse, to find common ground with other believers and find ways that you can, fellowship and even, do ministry together. But that does have a tendency sometimes to overlook methodological errors, which sometimes are more than methodological, differences. Sometimes they're rooted in theological differences. Yeah. So I can see how a statement really that gets into detail, and the statement does get into detail, and some of those details are things that I think most believers that would listen to our show would go, well, that's obvious. Why would that need to be stated? Things like the exclusivity of Christ or the supremacy of Scripture. But also it gets into things like, the Holy Spirit will not lead someone to remain in a non-Christian religion. And you're like, well, that's kind of obvious, right? Like, of course, if someone out of a Muslim background becomes a believer, they should join a church and not just stay in the mosque. But as clearly as the statement points out, as those who are involved in missions, intimately know, that isn't as obvious.
No, they're certainly not givens, are they?
So why spend so much time to state? I guess I've kind of answered my own question in some ways, but I'd like you to elaborate. Yeah. Why spend so much time stating the seemingly obvious?
Because I think you pointed to it earlier on, that whereas there might be a tacit kind of, yes, we're evangelicals doing mission together, and of course you want to give the benefit of the doubt, when you get into the detail of what does an evangelical theology of religions look like? What does evangelical mission look like? What does it mean to say that the Bible is our ultimate authority? I think some of the consequences or the application of that, I think, have been a bit fuzzy or blurry in certain missiological contexts. So again, let me give you the example of how we use social sciences, or how do we understand things like the insider movement, or can you use the camel method in terms of in getting from the Quran to Jesus? All of these things which in kind of academic missiological statements are kind of discussed a lot. We wanted to get to spend some time at a quite detailed level, just answering that from what we thought is a perspective that recognizes that there are these fundamental statements to be a Reformed Christian, to be an evangelical Christian, that are, I think, non-negotiable. But what does it mean for mission to look like that? I think all of us come from I think, all of the people in the Southgate Fellowship come from a more reformed evangelical perspective. A number of us have been influenced by, for example, the missiologist J.H. Bavinck and Harvey Conn. So there's definitely a confessional flavour to where this is coming from, even though that's not really laid out. But we wanted to cover everything from method through to the usefulness of extra biblical tools, or what does this mean for ecclesiology? I mean, that was a really interesting area that it really got me thinking, and that's where actually some people weren't able to sign the statement, not because they weren't evangelical, but the whole issue of what does it mean? What does the church? When you say the relationship between mission agencies and churches, what exactly should that be? Can we prescribe that in any way? And that's where there was some real kind of tussling between as it comes out in the statement that we do think that spiritual responsibility lays with the local church, although mission agencies are really important. But what's the relationship between the mission agency and the church? And these are just really important questions that we need to be discussing.
You mentioned something earlier that you and the others involved in the Southgate Fellowship, and I mean, this is a statement that's been signed by guys like Kevin DeYoung, Don Carson. I mean, and so this isn't just, a group of, maybe missiologists that are only focused on that discipline and others outside of that discipline haven't heard of. It's starting to gain traction among pastors, people who write on issues of theology. But you mentioned earlier that you guys hold dear the 5 solas and their impact on missions.
Yeah.
So we would celebrate, we love the 5 solas. How does that impact missions specifically? Can you walk that up for us briefly?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to sola scriptura, and then I know that I keep going on about the method thing, but for me that's really important.
Yeah.
It means that there is an asymmetry, or there is a priority in terms of understanding what does the Bible say about the other, the religious other. What does the Bible say about mission in general, in a way that governs any kind of other social science that might be going on. Now, again, I am critical of theologians who don't think missiologically. I mean, I have a love for mission. I want people to hear about the Lord Jesus Christ and be saved, and I don't want to do that in a broad brushstroke way. So I'm all for detailed ethnographic, anthropological, social science, but it's got to be governed by the norm of Scripture. And so I think sometimes we've lost that. I just look at some even evangelical missiology departments, and it could just be a social science, it could just be anthropology, it could just be sociology, it could just be ethnography, which are all important disciplines. But I do think to be evangelical, they have to be biblical, and so maybe that's been assumed a little bit too much. And what the statement's trying to say is, no, all of these things need to be explicitly put under sola scriptura, or only by Christ. Again, that goes back to the salvation question. And how are people saved? What does it mean that Jesus is the only mediator? What does the Bible say about that? So that does go back to questions of exclusivity versus inclusivity versus pluralism. So you can run through all of those 5 solas. and say what does a particular missiology mean when they're refracted or put through the prism of those great Reformation slogans, which are so dear to and at the heart of evangelicalism. And so we just wanted to state those very clearly.
And the way the Reformation happened, and the DNA of it, is what we're trying to do. We're trying to reform missions in the sense that the Reformation was all about ad fontes, going back to the sources, going back to the scriptures. The formal principle, the principle that shaped and informed the Reformation and Protestantism that came out of that was sola scriptura. The material thing the material principle that formed as a result of that was the doctrine of justification by faith, right? And sola fide. And so what we have now, I think, in evangelicalism is we've abstracted sola fide. In other words, we've said it's very simple to come to faith in Christ. All you have to do is trust him, even just mentally. You don't even have to tell anyone. You don't have to do anything public, right? Just have this inward assent of Christ. But what we've done is we've kind of plucked that off of the tree of sola scriptura. We're not deriving that from scripture. And so that's sort of how we end up at this point where you have things like insider movements and radical forms of disciple-making movements that aren't coming out of the organic whole and unity of scripture. You're saying, like, if we're going to have things that we love and cherish like sola fide, then it needs to come out of missiology as sola scriptura, as a biblical, as a theological sort of discipline.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as one of you, I don't know whether it's Alex or Scott, as one of you said about 20 minutes ago, that this isn't just a challenge for missiology from a theologian. I want to challenge theologians with missiology. That is to say, there is a lot of theology that goes on that isn't really interested in people being saved or the importance of mission or getting the gospel out there or contextualization. And I'm passionate that theology needs mission and mission needs theology, and the two need to go together. Now, I come from a particular specialist background in terms of I'd call myself a theologian primarily, but I think it's so important that we don't have these in colleges and seminaries and agencies. We don't have this compartmentalization. We all need to be helping each other. The theologians need the missiologists. The missiologists need the theologians. We need the biblical studies people. There's this the kind of the encyclopedia of truth is so crucial to a holistic understanding of the theological task and the missionary task.
And I wonder, I can't speak to how accreditation works in the UK, but in the States, we've had this trend, which I think comes out of a really good desire. And I had been in higher ed in the past, where in order to help your people who want to become missionaries actually get into the countries that are the least reached, they can't have missions in their titles of their degrees. So we transition things into like global studies and international studies, which then the accreditation agencies required they have a heavier dose of social science professors and an emphasis and less of the theological stuff. And I know these schools and these professors that I talk to, that's not their heart at all to see missions change from a part of theology proper to social sciences studies, but I do wonder sometimes if that change of emphasis and that requirement by accreditation agencies in order to do that causes those things to get the social sciences get the bigger the heavier weight, and I think it's really important that we make sure that even if you are a social sciences professor with a heart for missions, that you recognize that this has to come under these concepts of theology and ecclesiology and soteriology and submit those things to the Word of God.
Well, Amen.
Yeah,
completely. And again, I think there's a bigger project here of seeing. I mean, you're very blessed in the US to have the liberal arts tradition that we don't really have here. But when liberal arts is working well, the idea is that it's not the theology department or the biblical studies department that's ruling over everything else. It's that the Bible, it's that Scripture is overarching the liberal arts in a way that informs all subjects,
right,
including theology as well. And so that's certainly the case for mission. And so we need more work between theologians and missiologists. And of course, then it's not just any old theology. Then it's saying, as evangelicals, there is a confession, an orthodoxy that has been proclaimed for 2,000 years that we think is the pattern of sound teaching, the good deposit, that we need to articulate missions with in terms of that content.
So as good evangelicals and good missionaries, we do want to see, what do we do with this, right? So we've got a great statement. I really appreciate the work that went into it, asking really hard questions and trying to give very specific answers. What do you hope will actually come out of this in the missions community and in the churches?
Yeah, well, two things really. I think firstly, we'd love to start a discussion with on the statement itself, probably at a more academic level. But also we want to move then to have, for example, it is quite a weighty statement. And how do we disseminate that into local churches, mission agencies? How does it become part of the curricula in terms of discussing the statements that are there? So how do we have more conferences and more content generated from the affirmations and denials? So we're all trying to work out at the moment what is the next stage. I think certainly a more accessible version or an explanation of what's going on in terms of a commentary. But we've already heard of some churches and some mission agencies who are using it as a kind of a teaching guide with questions coming out of the statements. And so we hope it is going to grow. Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, can you give us some ways that people can connect either with you, with the Southgate Fellowship, or even with your college, Oak Hill Theological College in London? So
for people who are interested in the Southgate Fellowship, it's the southgatefellowship.org, and we have our own website. Also, an edition of an open access journal called Themelios, the Gospel Coalition Theological Journal. I'm one of the contributing editors there, but we published that statement in Themelios as well. So there's two ways you can look at the statement. My big book on other religions is called For Their Rock is Not As Our Rock, or in the States, Their Rock is Not Like Our Rock, with Zondervan. And that's a kind of a detailed theology of religions. My book Plugged In is a popular book which tries to say that we're all religious, and how do we look at aspects of contemporary culture with missiological eyes, really. And then, the college that I teach at is Oak Hill College. I'm actually moving on in the summer to head up a new ministry. I'm going to be the director of something called the Crosslands Centre for Culture, Religion and Mission, which is part of Crosslands Training, which is a partnership between Oak Hill and Acts 29. And that's a new kind of theological institution. And I'm going to head up a new centre there where I'll be developing more work in this area. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Oh, that sounds exciting. And, to encourage our listeners, we cannot take anything for granted. I mean, whether it's how technology kind of gives us this illusion that we can all exist within the same space or whatever. But, today it's Scott getting knocks on his doors from Muslims asking why he's going about doing the work of the gospel. Tomorrow it could be me. Tomorrow it could be you, Dan. Tomorrow it could be you, listener. We can't take anything for granted. Right. We need to know what Scripture says about religions. And so, Dan, thank you for joining us today. And we encourage people to go to the southgatefellowship.org and familiarize themselves with the statement. It's beefy, but it's worthy. And if you're involved in missions at all, that can be a good tool for you. And we're excited about it. And Scott, for those of our listeners who've persevered up to this point, I have an announcement. I teased this at the beginning too. So while we're talking about this, actually dovetails really nicely. But while we're talking about the need for missions to be theological and for theology to be missional, Chad Vegas, who is the one of the founders of Radius International, he's on the board, pastor of Sovereign Grace Church in Bakersfield, California. He's been on our show here before, and he's heavily involved, like I said, in Radius and a few other endeavors that are missional. Him and I have a new book coming out. Missions by the Book is our working title, and it revolves around all of this. We tackle several of the main categories of systematic theology, basically saying, hey, we need to use our systematic theology to get at our missiology. We need to get there going through our theology and not around it. And that is coming out this year. We have gotten the verbal commitment from a publisher. We have our finished manuscript. And so, Scott, you knew that was in the works, but wanted to let our readers know.
Well done.
Thank you. Wanted to let our listeners know to be looking out for that. And that'll be an exciting resource for people as well. We'll be sharing more about that in the days and weeks ahead. For everyone else, thank you for listening to the Missions Podcast today. And to get more content, go to missionspodcast.com or abwe.org/podcast. While you're here, before you leave, smash the subscribe button, leave us a positive rating and a review that helps us get this content in front of other people. If you have a topic suggestion, it was a listener to the show that suggested that Dr. Strange join us today. Send that to alex@missionspodcast.com. We check that box. We want to hear from you. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening this week, and we'll see you next week.